And Vice President Keller, we will have a motion for resolution 4.2.
Oh, okay.
And that's going to
I
come
will
up in the
now.
consent calendar, but we're going to chat about it. So maybe you can make the motion, and then I'll turn it to Bryce, and Bryce will explain what we're voting on. You can ask your questions,
Okay,
like in a democracy.
okay.
Okay, cool.
We'll try.
All right, let's start. All right, well, I will call to order the Salem Planning Commission for April 16th, 2024. And if the clerk could call the roll, please.
Commissioner Augustine.
Here.
Commissioner Fott is absent. Commissioner Heller.
Here,
Commissioner Rhodes. Here. Commissioner Slater.
Here.
Commissioner Tigan is absent. Commissioner Truitt is absent. Commissioner Mayor Brindell.
Here.
We have one.
Thank you. The man who saved the meeting. Thank you. All right, do we have public comments? Right, seeing none, then I will look to Commissioner Rhodes to make a motion on the minutes, please.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from March 19th, 2024.
Thank you very much. Do I have a second? I'll second that. All right. We have a motion and a second. I will be abstaining since I was not here and did not read that. I believe, is that true for you too, Mr. Augustine? Mr. Augustine?
That is correct.
All right, very well. I guess I will again ask the clerk to call the roll.
Commissioner Augustine.
Abstain.
Commissioner Heller.
yes.
Commissioner Rhodes. Approve. Commissioner Slater.
Abstain.
Commissioner Mayor Brindell.
Approve. All right, the minutes have passed. So I'm going to look to Vice President Heller for a motion on resolution 4.2A.
I move that we adopt the code amendment resolution number 24-01.
Thank you, and may I have a second?
I'll second.
Right, to change up. Thank you, Commissioner Augustine. Now that we have that moved and seconded, I'm going to ask Bryce if you could explain what we're voting on and have an opportunity to ask him some questions.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Commissioners. Bryce Bishop with the City of Salem Planning Division, sitting in for Lisa tonight. This is a resolution that we've come before you to initiate to enact another series of amendments to the code that are based on recent changes in state law, and they primarily focus on housing because obviously there's a big push for reducing barriers and processes and fees and expenses associated with development of housing. And then one of the things, from the governor's last task force in her housing bill that was recently approved in the last short session was to amend the city's development code to make sure that to give, I guess, essentially local jurisdictions two options. You can either, for a period of time, be under a requirement to approve all adjustments, generally all adjustments that are applied for housing developments, in residential mixed-use zones in the city, or local government can opt to retain their ability to review those applications and still approve them under their discretion rather than being made to, if you can demonstrate that over the past 5 years leading up to the passage of your amendments to, or your request for an exception from the requirement to be under mandatory adjustments, that you've approved 9%. So essentially showing that we as a city, we do work with applicants and are flexible, and we don't, try to get in the way of, blocking housing and jacking up housing costs. So we're going with option D, trying to demonstrate to the state that yes, we, do our workable. We do work with developers. We do approve adjustments when they can meet the criteria. And there are some additional changes that do need to be made to the code because there are certain standards that are in there that do conflict with the standards that the state requires to be adjustable. Like in some zones, we have a density standard for maximum density that can be adjusted. So we have to make sure that's adjustable. And so we went through and made changes to that in the code to make sure all the standards that apply to housing are adjustable. And then there will be some changes to the historic chapter, the historic preservation chapter 230, which is along with this and procedural wise to align with the House bill. And then some changes to security gates and other like code cleanup and other, minor policy changes that are going along with this. And this is going to be unique in the fact that any change that you make to the historic chapter is typically, reviewed by the Landmarks Commission for recommendation before it goes to council. And then the other chapter is the Planning Commission that, makes a recommendation before it goes to the council. So in this case, since we have the historic chapter and other chapters of the code being affected, the entire, the Landmarks Commission and the Planning Commission would be convened for a joint hearing. So that would be a, new experience for everybody. So that'll be a unique thing about it. And then, the goal is to have these amendments, in place, this summer, we have till the end of the year to get them done, but then we have to make application to the new Housing Accountability and Production Office to get the exception. So here, so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing this month. So, and so as identified in the resolution used put together, creating flexibility for density requirements, meaning we get rid of some of the provisions on adjusting maximum in some circumstances, allowing like an R1 zone middle housing to be developed on lots that are smaller, 6,000 square feet, because like today in the single family residential zone, you can do duplexes on single family lots that are 4,000 square feet or greater, and you could do triplexes on lots that are 5,000 square feet or greater. But in the multifamily R1 zone, the minimum lot size is 6,000. So we have some inconsistencies there. So we're trying to, give the same flexibility in the RM1 multifamily residential zone, which is a little bit higher density of the family zones, to be able to do the same thing you can do in the single family zone. So there's some cleanup stuff going on there. And then in terms of the historical design standards, we're going to be putting in standards for gates, security gates, because as part of this, because we're touching a historic chapter and there's a concern that's been going on with security in the downtown, we're just decided to wrap that in this code amendment package. So we're going to establish design standards for those in the historic district, and then also make sure that those standards also would allow for the gates to be installed in the other properties in the CB zone in the downtown, and also look at taking the transparency and window requirements that are applying in the CB zone, and then moving those into the historic district chapter to make sure that there's some consistency between properties within the historic district and inside the historic district, because right now there are different standards. Like in the CB zone, if you're doing new construction, you have to have 60%, 65% of your ground floor windows. The historic code does not require that for new construction, so we want to establish consistency for that and for awnings and yes, weather protection awnings and ground floor windows and then security gates to establish consistency. So it's a whole package of things, and a long time to do them. So,
Are there questions? I have one or two. In terms of the window frontage, is that planning to go up in the historic district, or are we bringing it down in the CB district?
It's going to be consistent with the CB, so it's 65%. Yeah, because right now it just says you have to have storefront windows, and it doesn't provide a percentage.
We're talking the historic district downtown, we're not talking about
Correct. Yes.
historic housing districts.
Yeah, right. That standard would not work for this historic.
I can just see lots of varying people.
Yeah, because like the Holman Hotel, they had, the percentage of windows you would have in the CB zone, but they weren't required to do that. They just did the options. Yeah. So,
Does anyone have a question about variances and what we're talking about with respect to variances on applications? No,
does everybody know the difference between a variance and an adjustment?
this isn't a quiz, but this is just a good time to ask because.
Tell me more.
So, we have two means of deviating from standards in the code. One is a variance and the other is an adjustment. The variance process, we really don't use because the adjustment process is very flexible. So the variance process, it requires a public hearing before the hearings officer. And, because the standards for adjustments are written the way they are, we really don't need variances anymore. So what you see most of the time with applications are adjustments, and there's two types. There's a class 1 adjustment and there's a class 2 adjustment. The class 2 adjustment is when you deviate from the standard by more than 20%, or you're deviating from a non-minimum standard, and then a class 1 is if you're deviating from the standard by 20% or less. So if your setback, is like 20 feet, you can adjust that setback by 4 feet, reduce it by 4 feet if you can demonstrate with a class 1 adjustment, if you can demonstrate the proposal that you're doing equally or better meets the intent of the standard to be adjusted. So a lot of times when somebody asks for a reduction to a setback that has landscaping in it, if they provide a higher density landscaping, if they provide like a higher fence, decorative fence, that offset of the width, of setback with landscaping is kind of made up for, or equal or better met by a smaller setback with more landscaping or maybe taller vegetative screening or fence or something like that. So it's kind of a trade-off. So when somebody asks for a reduction to a standard, they have to demonstrate how their development is equal or better meeting the standard in some of the create essentially.
This is an important issue because it can sometimes come back and bite us when we approve something that people care a lot about, and then it can change up to 20% outside of the commission's actions. So if we say, oh, we're gonna limit this to, you're gonna leave 100 trees, and then all of a sudden there's 80 trees left, people can say, what happened to that? We were at a public hearing, we heard the planning commission say there were gonna be 100 trees left over. Now there's just 80. That was the adjustment process. So just so that we're all aware that there is that latitude after the commission has acted. And
Well,
sometimes.
Let me just point one thing, it kind of depends, so like with trees, if you're doing residential development subdivisions, there's a tree conservation plan, this has to get approved. And then after the tree conservation plan is approved, an applicant can come in and go through an application process for a tree conservation plan adjustment, which is different from the adjustments we're talking about, in chapter 250. The tree conservation plan adjustment is a specific mechanism afforded folks in chapter 808 or tree preservation ordinance. And you have to demonstrate that after approval of the tree conservation plan, that there were unforeseen circumstances that could not have been anticipated at the time of original development, that the adjustment is the most reasonable way to address them. Back before we had our most recent version of the tree code that we adopted, which is now a couple of years ago with the latest big UDC update, we weren't getting a lot of information, in terms of like the critical root zones. And now any tree conservation plan you do for a residential development, for instance, in subdivision, you have to show the lot boundaries that you're proposing to create. You have to show the setback or the building envelope of the lots, each one of those lots. And you have to show the trees 10 inches or greater with their critical root zone. Critical root zones will put a radius for every 1 inch of diameter of the tree. And so then now we can look at subdivision lots, the potential future building envelopes and the tree critical root zones, and determine, well, hey, you're showing like these 2 trees that are saved like on the left 2/3 of the property, the critical root zones like the way into the middle of the lot. You're not going to be able to save those trees. So either reconfigure the lots in a way to save them, or if they have the ability to just designate those for removal, it's saving the percentage they can do. And so in the past, before we had that information, it would be great. People would like show trees to be saved, like maybe a 15-foot fir tree between 2 lots in essentially a 10-foot setback area. And then the builders come in and they look at that, oh, we can't save those trees. And then they come in for adjustments and say, oh, we got to remove the tree for grading. So we were doing a lot of tree conservation plan adjustments. So by having more information now up front, I think we're going to be to a point where we can start reducing the number of adjustments because we're having a more rigorous review. So
With that, should we call the roll? Let's do it.
Commissioner Augustine?
Aye.
Commissioner Heller? Commissioner Rhodes? Aye. Commissioner Slater?
Aye.
Commissioner Villarreal?
Aye. All right, motion passes. Resolution passes. I was going to get us right to the planning commission, Commissioner, the administrator's report, but I realized we have someone waiting to give a presentation to us. Ms. Wardring, do you want to step up and join us? So we have an urban renewal area presentation, which is something that we requested to understand the urban renewal process.
Good evening, Commissioner.
We
Can
have
you hear me or do you want this?
Pardon?
Can you hear me if I just speak or do you need this?
We need the microphone.
I think that one works.
How about now?
Thank you so much for this opportunity and for you being, giving up your time to be commissioners. I'm staff liaison to a board, and I so appreciate all my board members, their support of me and the projects of which we do. So thank you, because I'm sure the planning staff really appreciate all of you. So again, my name is Sheree Warburton. I noticed it was spelled wrong on the agenda and it had my email. So just in case you need me, it's SHERIWAHRGREN@cityofsalem.net. So there's 4 of us in the urban division of the Community Planning and Development Department that address the 8 urban renewal areas that we have. And I thought I would be a little bit different tonight and tell you what it isn't before I go in with what it is, especially right now with sensitivity about general fund. I thought this way it will make it really clear what urban renewal tax increment funding is. It cannot be used for police, fire, maintenance, repairs, sidewalk cleaning, promotions, and third-party services such as security. So it's very different than general fund. It's governed by ORS 457, and it is very restricted as to what we can use it for, which is why you probably wonder why, oh, we're buying a piece of property with urban renewal money at a time where we have shortages over here. I can't pay for a police officer, but I can acquire a piece of property in a blighted area to stimulate economic development and to address blight. So urban renewal is just that. It is a tool to stimulate investment in economic development, address blight, and grow property tax valuation. It is not a tax. So tax increment, I think people get confused that it's a tax. So if we close in the renewal area, I think there's a misunderstanding that our property taxes would be decreased. That's not the case. It is not a tax. So I just thought those couple of things I'd just get right out there before I kind of get more technical, but again, can't be used for operational, has to be used for capital projects. So again, in order to have a URA, the statute requires that we have to have a boundary and you have to have a plan, and the plan needs to define the purpose of that URA, and the money can only be spent in a project within that URA. I can tell you this is probably the #1 thing that I get all the time, because the boundary means what? Right outside of it, you're outside of it. Statesman Journal building, it's like the perfect example. My boundary's in the middle. Sure. Statesman's on the outside. Can you expand the boundary? But, so wherever there's boundary, it's like somebody needs it right outside that boundary. And again, the plan, when it's created, says this is the kind of projects that you can use tax increment for. If it's not in the plan, now I have to do an amendment if it's a legitimate type of item that can be spent and bring it in. I think the best example of, I think it was Planner Bryce, hate to give credit, but 30 some years ago when they created Riverfront, which has Riverfront Park and it's a downtown park. Somebody in planning, maybe it was your group that did it then, was brilliant, because when they went to define the boundary, they wanted to do a bridge from Riverfront Park over to Minto Island. Okay, unless it's in my boundary, I can't pay for it. So somebody thought, we can't do a bridge to nowhere, because basically the boundary was going to be on the east side of the river, but somebody put a little square over on the island. Even though at that time it would have been owned by Boise, Cascade, because they knew we would have money at some point, maybe, to do the bridge, but how would we land it? There would be no money to put the other side. That was like the most brilliant example of somebody having the foresight to think through something that they really, really saw as a potential project to connect those two parks. And then obviously the historic railroad bridge, we were lucky enough to get that far above. So we have that, all those, I think 41 miles of trails connection. So you didn't do it, Bryce, but somebody from the planning department really had foresight into that. So this is where I think the other piece of confusion comes into play. Urban renewal revenue comes from the annual property tax collections on the growth of assessed valuation within the boundary, and it's called tax increment. So when a URA is created, the amount of taxes collected in that boundary is frozen. It's kind of like a frozen tax base. And so whatever was dispersed at that time to the taxing districts continues to be dispersed. It's not part of what's collected in the tax increment. Only the increase over that frozen base is what is tax increment. And I think that's kind of confusing too, where if you have an urban renewal area, nobody, the schools, transit don't get taxes, that's not true. We don't take those taxes of the value when it was frozen. It's just what grows based on those investments that we do. How am I doing? Is this, I know it's kind of complicated. I'm really trying to make it more simple because that is something that we get asked all the time. You're taking money from others that need it at this time, and we're not taking what they received at that time, we froze the tax base. And considering the types of investments that we do, those values are going to increase. So there could be that correlating, your taxes are going to go up because we've done a lot of investment in some really bad projects and in some really bad areas and put infrastructure in so that others could do redevelopment in areas. So the other part of when we create the plan is you have to identify maximum indebtedness. How much are you going to spend in an urban renewal area? You have to determine that right up front. Because when tax increment comes in, that isn't what goes back out the door. In order to get it back out the door, we have to take in loans. So if I get this much money, I can use it for this much in loan. So it's calculated based on what do you think your maximum debt's going to be in this particular urban renewal area. So every one of the urban renewal areas has a different value. Some financial wizard sits down and probably looks at the number of properties, what they're valued at, what you think the growth is going to be over a certain time frame, and they come up with this maximum indebtedness. So that dictates how long an urban renewal area is going to be open. Because I think that's the other question that comes up quite a bit is, can you close this? You know, what triggers a closure? Well, the maximum indebtedness triggers a closure. When you hit that, then you have a couple of options. You stop collecting and you use whatever you collect to finish off the projects that you want to do. Or you do an amendment to increase that maximum indebtedness so you can keep. Does that make sense? That's another one of those that is kind of tricky, and they're all different. So again, like I shared with you, we have 8 urban renewal areas. 3 of them have advisory boards. They don't all have advisory boards, and I'll talk to you about why that is. And 3 of them have financial incentives. They don't all have financial incentives. And they're all forecasted to close at different times based on that maximum indebtedness that I just went over. So in Riverfront, for example, we had 315 in maximum indebtedness for that urban renewal area. Unlike North Gateway, that has like 101 in maximum indebtedness million that they can have over time. So again, some of the projects that we have done over the years, and considering most of my career at the city has been federal programs, downtown, now citywide. I can really tell you all of what we've invested in Riverfront. Because I have put out more than 300 grants. And prior to the triggering of BOLI at $750,000, because we're limited now if the city puts money. If I put urban renewal money into a project and it's 751,000, that entire project now has to be created. So typically, if you see my staff reports come in and I'm saying I'm going to do a $38 million project and I'm putting 749,999 tax increment into it, that's why there's typically a pattern to the 740, 749, because if it goes 750, they got. So that's kind of, that wasn't the case when I was hired, and I did a lot of $1 million loans to get historic buildings in downtown, some housing, but then they changed the threshold of what we could put into a building. So since that, we spent $750. I have a banking background, so as soon as I was hired here, anything that needs a loan, anything financial kind of came to who I am. So again, in downtown, tax increment money was used to take Riverfront Park, which was a brownfields from Boise Cascade, and made it Riverfront Park, which is pretty amazing. Probably just about every historic building has received some form of financial incentive and grant. The grant program in downtown is different than the grant program in North Gateway, and it's different than West Salem. Ours has objectives. So if you wanted a grant, you would have to be recruiting a business. So you have a vacant space. You would be expanding a business. You would be doing upper floor renovations. We also have a strategic grant, which is used to help fund improvements for crime prevention. So we've done trash enclosures, cameras, exterior security lights, not inside, but these are all exterior building improvements. And again, it has to be something that is capital project, a capital investment into that project. I think recently you probably have heard about Block 50. Over time, we acquired several buildings close to UGM. Again, that was kind of interesting because to jumpstart UGM being able to go and raise money, we did a sales agreement, even though we didn't take that property down until they had a new facility that they could move into. And then again, just part of being strategic, having something bigger, having more of a catalytic site to influence the look and feel and address that blighted look there. And we bought Saffron's, and then we bought ABC Music. And we just recently selected Elin Chase Nickus to redevelop. So hopefully something really exciting to do there. But the home and hotel, grant money going to the home and hotel, the Co's housing project, 148 unit right by there, Ribbonwood, which will be opening pretty quick. The Citizens Apartments, which is where the Dynamod is at High and Schenectady, that would hopefully start probably 2025 in the spring. So police facility.
I have a question for you, if I could. You talked about $750,000 grant award. That's different from your ability to just purchase property. Is that correct? These are two different things. So Block 50, there was no cap on that. That wasn't a $749,999 transaction.
That is an excellent question. To somebody other than ourselves, we can acquire $5 million. We can use a budget that we would have a line item for, and we can acquire. And again, Riverfront is very different than the other URAs in that we have significantly more revenue we always have more a hefty budget to put out in grants. We always have a hefty budget for acquisition so that when these opportunities come up, which would be catalytic, we could step in and do it. I think the other significant project was the Salem Convention Center. That is an agency-owned asset, it's not a city-owned asset, and that is one that Riverfront Renewal did a bond for, it has since paid off, but that, obviously that was catalytic for that too. So you can ask me anything along the way, or if it's like, we'll talk about something else, I can do that too. So again, I'm very familiar with everything in downtown just because if it's a financial incentive or if I'm meeting with somebody trying to get them to do something and help them out, I'm more familiar with it. Obviously, I just recently got a grant approved for the Forge building, and that would have been the former Liberty Plaza. I spent many, many years addressing all the large historic buildings, trying to get housing in there and trying to help those property owners get those leased up. And no sooner did that happen than we lost Nordstrom's, we lost Penny's, we lost TJ Maxx, and Liberty Plaza was pretty much had one tenant, and then across the street where the former Wells Fargo building was, it's the Pit. So the reason why with this hair that I have is that I was on a roll and then 5 steps forward and 6 steps backwards, all of a sudden, instead of having the Montgomery Ward building, the Metropolitan building, the Newberry's building, all of those vacant and needed something, I now got those taken care of, and now I have Penny's, Liberty Plaza across the street, the Pit. Salem Center has struggled, they just now have a new owner, but now I have another big blight with the former Pin. I mean, now it's like I'm back at, okay, what do I need to do to try to get those, and that's where sometimes might be a disconnect between what a property owner might want to do versus what we're pushing, or let's just, we have $38 million in investment, what can we do to try to get that mixed use or just housing done in that location within all of the requirements that a developer has to undertake to move, because these are big projects. These are $30+ million projects. So obviously Liberty Plaza, the Forge, it is fenced off right now, and they have a tenant for upstairs, and they are really thinking outside the box as to what they want the tenant mix to be in there. So, stay tuned. Penny's building, I don't think he likes me telling him that his paper's falling down in the window and that the fire alarm is dripping water down the side. He's not local, and that makes it a little bit more difficult, but I won't give up. At least the Pit is under control by the same developer who did Ribbonwood and who's going to be doing Citizens Apartment. That isn't under construction, that diamond lot. So maybe something fun and exciting will happen there. And then Salem Center, I think having local now, we may see some big changes there. So fingers crossed, my 4 corners that we love, maybe we'll get some love out of it.
There's also Rite Aid too.
That's correct. That is correct. And that is like 5 steps outside my back door. I don't know what's closer to me, Penny's right outside my back door or Rite Aid right across the street. Which is ever since I was hired, that is to me the best site in downtown. You see it coming across, from West Salem. It's got enough size to it. Something has to happen there. Exciting one of these days. The property owner isn't interested in selling. I think it be snatched up really, really quickly. But timing's everything. That's just how it's been with any acquisition. It's timing. If they can't get a tenant in there and they may at some point be interested. So yes, I feel like I have all of them on speed dial. Like, what can I do? How can I help? Any progress, anything, we have these incentives, let us help you, because we would love to have now the north look and feel and be as exciting and vibrant as it kind of is. It's kind of like Court South is kind of where everybody wants to be, but right there at Chemeketa going north, that's where I'm hoping with all this new blood and this investment in private capital, we're gonna see some really fun things. So West Salem, I think their big project right now is Second Street Streetscape. And that's one of our big projects in downtown too. We're going block by block doing streetscape improvements. And when I say streetscapes, for me, it's under the sidewalk, so you're not going to see it. But downtown is very old, so the electrical infrastructure, the water infrastructure, it's just not good. So we can't have a consistent look with twinkle lights. We can't have baskets with drip. But that's what we're putting in. So it's not just what you see on top. It's, and putting in the conduit to be able to keep up on any fiber optics or any changes there. So it's a lot under, but it does look better. Touch. And West Salem is doing that also. We have some art pedestals, West Salem and downtown, so maybe to get some more art. It's just hard right now because you don't want it damaged or vandalized. So it's keeping that balance right now of how you continue to aesthetically make things pleasant for especially pedestrians and not have to worry about them being harmed in some way, because it is a big investment.
The infrastructure work that you're doing downtown for the streetscape, does that improve earthquake resiliency at all? Are they tied together?
I would say, if you want a really detailed answer, I could go to Public Works, but considering they're filling in these vaults,
Mhm.
I would think that that must contribute to it, because there's a lot of empty vaults underneath the sidewalk. You'd be shocked at how far out some of those buildings go underneath the sidewalk. So when we hit that block with streetscape, it's all filled in. And that has to improve the infrastructure versus if something happened, you would go down, 10 feet into a basement. But again, that would be a good question for Public Works, but the vaults have to be filled in as a requirement. So I would think that would help the infrastructure of the sidewalks. So again, West Salem's doing a streetscape, and again, they have a grant program too that can be. I'm gonna go back to your question, Mr. Slater. If you wanted money for acquisition, that's not eligible with my grant. Every advisory board is different as to kind of how they set the parameters. So it's always been in downtown. Happy to give you money to put something there, not so much to give you money and what if it's septic? I gave you money to acquire it. We want the benefits of actually what's going to be built, how it's going to contribute to jobs. So acquisition has never been something that the downtown grant program has funded. That's not the case in like West Salem. You could get a grant in West Salem to partially fund acquisition of the property. Every plan is just so different. So we have AU urban renewal areas, boundaries have to have a plan. So if you look at the Gilchrist URA, it pretty much has a project, the Gilchrist Street. So that particular URA will start and be finished very different because once that improvement's done, it's done. And it's like Mill Creek. It was created to work in collaboration with the state of Oregon because they had that land and we needed industrial land. And so we put in infrastructure and we have Home Depot and Amazon and I think there's only one site left there. But again, that plan is very, very different than like mine in downtown that has a million projects, very different than those that very few projects. South Waterfront, which is just south of Riverfront, where South Block is. If you looked at that plan, all about the creek. Pretty much all the projects in that plan address daylighting Pringle Creek. trails along Pringle Creek, connections to Riverfront Park. They're just really, you can tell when they were developed and helping to deal with, repurposing all of the Boise Cascades. I think it was 13 acres and all the environmental issues. Again, because going in and dealing with brownfields, going in and putting in increased water capacity, electrical upgrades, that is a big piece of what urban renewal is used for too. So let's see. North Gateway, their big project in the beginning was all of that street improvement that you saw along Portland. They have a grant program, and theirs would be more towards a business wanting to expand, a business needing funding for tenant improvements. And again, the kind of tenant improvements that we don't fund would be something that is cosmetic, because the goal is to put in an improvement that makes that space better and would be something that everybody would use. So if you wanted a chandelier, because I'm doing a boutique thing, that wouldn't be something that we would do, but changing out from regular to LED lighting, that would be something we would do. Putting in an elevator to address ADA, that is something that we've done quite a bit of. But if somebody wants a counter, then no, because the next person coming in is gonna rip that up. I get asked for bars all the time, and it's like, no, because the next person will rip that bar out, and I want it to stay with that space to make it just better for everyone. So they're all a little bit different. And again, I told you about South Waterfront. So one of the things that we've recently done is, don't ask me a lot of questions about this because I don't know. We're doing single URAs. So instead of doing big boundary like West Salem and North Gateway and Riverfront, we're doing it just a parcel. So if you have a piece of property and you need some investment and you're going to do affordable housing, because that's the qualifier, then we could do a single URA. We've only done one, but that is something now as a new tool that could be used. We have the capacity to do more URAs, and you probably saw that one of my team members came recently and said, what do you think, agency board, about us looking at doing a new urban renewal area, kind of north waterfront, so where Riverfront ends. There's a lot of properties north of that that could use this type of tool to address blight. And they kind of gave staff the, yeah, oh, go ahead, but creating an urban renewal would take quite a while and they're very expensive. But at least we got direction that that is something that they want to do. So I'm kind of ready for questions if you have them. I can, but my goal was to answer any question you might have in my presentation. How did I do? Okay,
You did well,
okay, good.
but this is an inquisitive group, I know. Commissioner, yep.
Excuse me, I didn't quite understand about when, the debt for an urban renewal area is paid, and then you could increase the debt. I didn't, maybe I've got your explanation jumbled up, but if it's paid back, what happens then?
So again, you didn't run anything up, and that's why some of these are just harder to explain. So it's created and somebody comes up and says, you ought to be able to get money, $315 million in debt, maximum indebtedness. That's what all of our projections show based on the current value of something over 40 years. This goes up, this goes up. You ought to be able to generate enough tax increment to continue to borrow to the point of 315 million. Because I thought that when I worked, I thought, oh, we get this tax revenue and then we put it out the door. No, we can get more because we use that to borrow, de jure bonds, and different types of bonds so that we can leverage what we get. The statute doesn't allow us to just take it and give it. You have to go through the bonding process. So that's why. So if I hit that maximum indebtedness, again, I can stop collecting, but I still have money because I had projects that I wanted to get done. So I can put that money out into projects. And then I would have to move forward with closing the URA after I use that money.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah, so, so that's one option, or you could go through a lengthy amendment process to increase that maximum indebtedness. So then you would be working again with the financial consultant to look at, could we, based on where we're at today, generate additional tax revenue that we could get more debt that we could use in projects.
I see, okay.
So you kind of have those two options. But again, because there's again this sensitivity to why don't you close them? Because we would get, we would have this money that we don't have now. That's not really that's not how it works, but it is confusing. I had a couple of examples.
But it is fair to say that when you close that district, the general fund then would benefit from the increasing value.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that,
And so with the other taxing districts. I mean, the goal, it's just a fact. The types of projects that we do increase the revenue that you're gonna get from taxes. The thing that's kind of interesting is that new construction really gives us a lot because you're starting with ground where an existing building and I put money in it, not so much the bang for the buck, very different with new construction. Because you're going from the value of ground to the value of $38 million building. Okay, so let's just take Riverfront. When the base was frozen, it was about 43 million. If we were to close, the city would receive 2.8 million of the 7 million in revenue. So again, for every one of them, kind of have, so in West Salem, the frozen base was 141 million. And in 2023, they received about 2.2 million in revenue. So if that one closed, the city would receive approximately 844,000. So I think again that there's a little bit of confusion as to what would you get if you closed it? Because if you think about it, those projects at the end of the day are going to generate a lot for you if you let it go through its entire maximum indebtedness period. So, yeah. Okay, now I'm ready. That was a good question, thank you.
are there other questions here? Commissioner Bureau Brunel, I have a question.
Is the single lot one you mentioned, is that the Jory Apartments?
Yes.
And has that been kind of a success and are other people looking at it as a model? Like, are we gonna do more of that?
There are, it is a success. Again, it's specific to trying to address the affordable housing needs that we have. I know of 2 other developers that have shown an interest in using that tool, but anytime you have affordable rents, just the feasibility, the financial feasibility and the level of subsidy that you need. That's why it's hard to do it. That's why most affordable housing developers use low-income housing tax credits. They use whatever they can for subsidy. They come in and they'll use our home investment partnership funds because we have those too. It really takes a lot of subsidies in order to fund and have it be financially feasible. Because it's all about how much does it cost to build it, but then when you convert to the permanent loan, how much are you going to have in revenue to pay a loan? And that's where the disconnect is. I can get the construction loan only if I can pay it off, but the rents really are tough when they are. Especially low.
Any other questions? I have, oh, go ahead. Thank you.
As far as the 750, with inflation, there's no, fully has that set and there's no bump up with the current
You can
unit.
talk to them about that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Please, would you? Because anytime something's fixed, especially with what we experienced after COVID, the increased cost for all materials related to construction. I know, one of my sons worked for a large construction company and they put him in a position of estimating. And it changed twice in a day on the cost of lumber. It was so difficult for him because obviously his job depended on not getting enough in what they needed to cover the costs, but not losing the deal because they they were higher than any other competitor. It was insane. I mean, only because every time we met with him, he was talking about it's changing multiple times a day, especially for lumber. So I don't know who came up with that at the time and thought that should just be flat for the rest. But that's not the case, cost economy. That's a very good question. I wish you'd take that. Go over there and take care of that copy.
Commissioner Rhodes will fix that for you. Just give her a couple months. Other questions? Yeah, I have one, maybe two questions. So there's a difference between, you have a grant program. And a lot of the funding sounds like goes out of the grant program, but there's also the ability for the city to buy things itself. Is that correct?
So I think what you just said is I can put grants out to a property owner to incentivize them fixing their building up, addressing environmental issues, having money to recruit a tenant to address vacancy. Yes. And I can also have funds where I can acquire blighted properties, go through a process and do a solicitation and ask for a developer to redevelop that. Yes.
That is exactly what I said. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
And then did I also hear you say that there is still room for additional urban development areas?
Again,
There's
the
capacity.
the state only allows you to have so many acres in urban rural areas. We have the capacity to do more, which is why just recently, when my team members came in to ask the agency, how do you feel about us doing another one? But there's also several that are close to their maximum indebtedness that will be going through the process of closing.
Because I think State Street is something that we should very much consider for urban renewal district. And if there's actually capacity to expand, I think that might be something the planning commission might want to think about in our advisory capacity to the city council.
We talked about 12th Street as well.
And 12th Street is. I think there might be a little list that some people have that we could talk about. So maybe that is something that we can put on our agenda. So thank you.
I think the director would be very interested in any information or interest or feedback that you want. Obviously, you have my email now. You'll give it to me and I will. Bryce is my team too, so you can give it to her. But I think it would be interesting to know if you guys have been talking and have identified areas that are blighted or have a need for infrastructure of some kind. Yes, that would be of interest.
We haven't talked about it as a group, but it sounds like this might be an opportunity. I think we'd have to think through what the process is, because obviously it would require some briefing from staff as well. But this is very helpful. Thank you for your participation tonight. I appreciate you staying late for us.
Thank you for the opportunity. And again, thank you all for what you do.
All right, I think that we're gonna quickly move through the rest of the agenda here. Do we have any informational reports?
Not tonight from the planning administrator standing.
Okay, subcommittee reports. Looking at you, but okay. No, so I guess no other planning administrators report. Understand she's having a good time in Minneapolis.
Yeah, she will be back tomorrow.
All right.
Perfect, thank you.
Are there any comments for the good of the order? No? And do we have any other public comments? All right, I think we are adjourned.